Welcome to another episode of Coffee Time. I'm your host and coffee drinking companion, Natalie of Natalie Christina Coaching. Coffee Time is a space where I invite you into the everyday, real talk conversations I'm having with the magical humans in my life. My sole aim, SOUL, is to create as genuine a connection as possible over this virtual platform, and I am so excited to be inviting you along for the ride. Together, we laugh, we rant, we introspect, all the good stuff. So without further ado, let's dive in.
Navigating Adulting 101, take one.
Adulting 101, except what is adulting? Do we know?
No, we don't know.
Okay.
So that's exactly why we're talking about it today. I know that you recently came out here from grad school to visit your friends and be back with your family and do all the things. And I mentioned to you as well, as you were helping me pick out shoes, that I was going to my 10-year high school reunion. And so I thought it was very appropriate. Is that what you say? Apropos? I don't actually know what that means. Is that like a thing?
I think that would work. Yeah.
Okay. Apropos that we talk about moving into the space of being an adult and being an independent individual in relationships that maybe previously were defined in a different way or by a different context. So like with parents, how do I reintegrate with my parents as an adult, as my own person, as opposed to, not that we're ever not their children, but as opposed to just being their child or their offspring or whatever. And even friends, like how do I come back? And like I did school back east as well, so I can kind of relate to that in my own way. How do I come back and reintegrate with these friends I haven't seen in years or year or whatever? With all the changes that I've gone through on this other end while they're living their independent lives. And for me, it was a big part of going back into that reunion context of just seeing how people have shifted and gaining a new perspective on what their experience had been 10 years ago that I was not privy to at that time, just because of all the high school things, which we can get into as we kind of dive deep into that.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's really challenging, I think, like navigating perceptions of how to be an adult person around your peers who are also adult people, but then your family are like, it's everybody is navigating their own autonomous experience, and it's really hard. And I think reflecting on my time coming back home recently, the thing that caused me to have the most success, and also the thing that messed me up the most, was just communication. Because I think, revisiting my friends, I felt like that was really smooth and it was great. And it was cool to see what had changed with them, but it went really well. But it's because I think the line of communication has been really open and respectful and responsible since day one. So there was less of a jarring feeling. Whereas more with my family, we have a very specific way of communicating with each other, and it can lead to things not going so well when I come back after some time, or when we get back in touch, and there's just a lot of discrepancies, and I find it really challenging to navigate. And I'm sure with you at your reunion, speaking with people like you said you hadn't seen in 10 years, and getting that new perspective on what their life was like to them, what the same situations that you experienced looked like through their eyes. It was like probably really interesting, and a little bit paradigm shifting, I would think, for certain things.
Mm-hmm. Did you find it, I know, like, okay, for me going back into my reunion, honestly, I was like a little bit terrified because I wasn't the most popular kid in high school, and like I didn't have necessarily any overt enemies to my knowledge, but I also was not part of like the popular crew. So some of those insecurities for sure came back, and like for me, I think that was an interesting thing to reconcile, because I know like in my day-to-day life now, like I'm a pretty confident, self-assured, self-directed person, and just realizing how quickly those insecurities and feelings of being other could come up just from going back into this environment with these people who have also had 10 years since that used to be a thing, right? And it was actually, this is like a funny aside, we showed up and I kind of congregated with the familiar people, and like I said hi to a couple other ones, but we all sat at this table. And we kind of looked around and realized that we were all at the same table, just like how we used to all kind of be the same. And we're like, well, this is a step up from the hallway floor at lunchtime. Like, because it's true. It's like we all still kind of fit into that groove. But I guess, and like with that, I definitely experienced a disconnect, like what you're saying. And that was actually something I was going to ask was like, did you feel sort of like a disconnect or like a strict like dichotomy between the person you are in your day-to-day life in Montreal and the person they believed you to be, like your parents in particular, based on your experiences up to the point of leaving at home?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a lot. And I think it does have to do with this idea of adulthood, and but being their child, but also being an adult. I think being over here, like, I mean, I love my family. Like, I love being their child. I know I'm always going to be their baby, and I love that. That's great. That's awesome. But at the same time, when I live here, I'm predominantly an adult and my own person and doing my thing. And so I get into that rhythm. But then being back, there's something about being back in your family's house, and when you're there visiting, you don't have your job or your whatever, how you get around. And it puts you back in the space of being a child again, except you're very much not, because you have all this lived experience that's otherwise. And I think that does lead to a disconnect, because it seems in some ways like you're kind of emulating the way you used to be when you were younger. And maybe that makes your parents feel like, or your family feel like the same behavior patterns are appropriate for everyone, when they don't fit anymore. And that's really confusing, I think. And it can lead to some, feeling like you're suffocating each other, or like you're not able to talk about simple things, because it's just like there's a little bit of a breakdown mentally there probably on both sides, I would say for sure, because it's just a really confusing feeling.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And that's like reminding me, like I think I mentioned to you before we were talking today, that I'm going to a family barbecue tonight. And like there's cat hair. Real life. And going into that environment, like I said, like it's like one of the first times I've got my own invitation to go to one of these things. Like my partner and I received our own invitation through a family member saying you should come. I didn't even actually realize until a couple nights ago that my father and stepmom are also going. And so I was like, oh, okay. Because I'm used to, like, years ago when I would get an invitation via them.
Yeah.
Or I wouldn't get invited because they'd been invited and said no. And people didn't think to extend an invitation to me because I am my father's daughter. And I had articulated a couple times without like too much expectation, like, we have very different schedules. So if you want me to be able to come, I would love to be there. And here's my number. Reach out to me direct next time. And it took a bit of time for that to kind of start to pick up, but now it has. And I was like, oh, cool. But it was a weird, like, you kind of like jarring feeling to realize like, oh, that actually happened. I didn't know he was going. And so now we're going as our own independent people in our own kind of, well, we'll say family units, to this event. And so that's really interesting. And then also for me, like going with, like being able to step into that environment with a full confidence and conviction around how I'm leading my life as my own person. And I don't think this is uncommon, like, especially with, and it's nothing to say about him either. Like, it's very much just me figuring out who I am in this relationship. So I want to make that very clear. This is from my perspective. It's not putting it on someone else. But it can be really difficult to go into an environment like that, especially with my father, as fully being my own person, without thinking, how is he going to view the thing that I'm doing? Will it be validated by him? Or having some sort of expectation that it will be. Usually that goes horribly wrong. Not saying just with him, but like in general, to have expectations about how people will approve or not of what I'm doing. And so the big thing for me, like tonight at this barbecue, is to be able to go in fully owning the fact that, yes, I am a coach. This is what I help women do. This is my truth. This is who I am, and this is my sole purpose. And I know that because I do. And to really live in that, I want to be able to do it without having that caveat of, and how do you feel about that, Dad? Because that's not me being that independent person that I know I am.
Mm-hmm. I know, yeah, I can 100% resonate with that because it's hard. I mean, you're taught and raised, and society tells you to expect validation or approval from your parental figures, and it's hard like it's hard to separate yourself from that, um, and to think of, I mean, and it's part of that same path, I think, of actualizing yourself as an autonomous person. There's like a lot of layers to that, and it starts, there's having your own schedule or living on your own or whatever, changing your communication patterns. But then this like deeper level of the validation thing, is a whole other part of that same process, I think. And I definitely, I'm the same, where it can be really challenging to be comfortable with, the way that my life is going on my own terms, just because it's hard to get that out of my head. Like, I wonder what I want them to, but I want them to be involved, but there's a difference between wanting them to be involved and like seeking their validation as well. I think that's the other thing, is that like, I trying to separate that from like, I want to have a relationship with them, and I want them to take interest in what I'm, I want to share what I'm doing in my life with them, but also not because I want their approval. And it gets kind of complicated at that level, because it's hard to separate those feelings, I think, from, especially when it's like a parent-child thing.
Yes, as you're saying this, not that this is like a how to adult, but like adulting 101, whatever.
Exactly.
As you're saying this, the thing that really came up for me was that I think a big part of this process, and maybe I've labeled it before, maybe I haven't, is grieving how that relationship used to look. Because I do think, like, especially as children, it's like, okay, did you get the grades to meet this goal? And how do your parents feel about that? Because I know I liked school, and to an extent, it was definitely about how I felt. But a lot of the goals that are set for us as children, probably because we didn't know how to make our own and be held accountable, are set externally. It's not an intrinsic self-directed goal or manifestation of what we truly desire. Like, we're at a point where we need to really learn how to do that. So people put it on us. And so I think, for me at least, part of it is kind of grieving that shift into, oh, wait, I can fully set my own goals and explore my own desires. And there is nothing wrong with that. And I can be my own motivator and my own accountability buddy. And like, I give myself the gold stars. But grieving the fact that that is no longer coming from that outside source, and being able to fill that space in from within ourselves, or from maybe our social circle. But I think at the end of the day, it really does come from like self/higher power type of deal, to fill that void that we used to get from those external familial sources.
Yeah, that, I think, I honestly, yeah, it's such a it's such a strange feeling, because but it's like you said, it's the combination of, it is a sense of grieving, like it is a sense of loss, that things are different now. You're not going to see your parents the same way, and they're not going to see you the same way anymore. And that is something to acknowledge and grieve. But at the same time, it's so freeing, especially because when you're grappling with this stuff, I would think anyway, for a lot of people, if you're grappling with this kind of stuff, it's because you were ready to go into this next thing. So this next phase, because if this is coming up for you time and time and again, it's because there's that shift is happening. And so you have to acknowledge the shift. But and when that happens, because you're ready for it to happen, it's like, it's really freeing. Like you said, it's really freeing and empowering to be your own accountability buddy, and to manage your own life, and to know that that I'm taking this responsibility. And yes, it's a lot, but this is like, I'm holding the reins now, and I have so much decisive power over my own life and my own choices. And you can really like think into your choices and reflect on them and take time with them, and then be able to stand by them fully as an adult. So I think, it's a funny feeling when you're on the crest of these things, because there's that loss, and then but then on the other hand, there's also this feeling of freedom that comes with it too, because you I mean, at this point, if we're adults, we're not dependent technically, like we're living our own lives, grappling with this kind of stuff. I think a lot of it is probably, speaking for me anyway, a lot of this is probably just like self-imposed based on my impressions of what I think my parents, it's not even like I'm involving them, it's just self-imposed guilting. And so the sense of freedom, I think, is more like, oh my God, like I don't have to do that because it's just me doing it. And that is kind of exciting when you start to realize that that's something you can handle, you can process it.
So, oh my God. Okay. That reminds me of a story from when I was a kid. So we had, in grade 7, we did a unit on like Egyptian history, whatever. So like mummies and all that stuff. And we had to draw this is so ridiculous in hindsight, like a scale drawing of a sarcophagus. Is that the word? But yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah. The thing, a 2-scale drawing of a sarcophagus for some Egyptian person. And I guess part of mine was not to scale, and I got a C+. I was like a good grade student. Like going into high school, like it wasn't abnormal for me to have like a 90+% average. Like that was normal. And I liked school. It was safe, whatever. So anyway, I got this C+, and talking about like going to them for the validation and like how it shifts now and that sort of thing. Like I said, like I did like school too. So to an extent, I think my drive for it did come from myself, even though the goals were imposed from like externally. But I got this grade and I made up this story that I couldn't tell my dad because he was putting the pressure on me about the grades. But through looking through this, like later on, as I grew up, I realized I was like, that wasn't coming from him. Like he really just wanted to be there to support me. And if he ever said anything that I took to be like, you're not good enough, it was really just like, okay, that's okay. And you can do better next time, right? Like it wasn't coming from like a scolding sort of place, but I built it up that way in my head. And so I think that really comes from that, like, you are your own worst critic sort of thing. And also maybe a bit of like something I've been talking about lately, and that comes up a lot in the entrepreneurial sector, is that imposter syndrome of like, is this really me? Can I really do this? And it's like, Daddy, please help me. Like, and so, yeah, anyway, I just remember that story. And it's like that pressure, it wasn't coming from him. I put it to him to make sense of it for myself, but it was really coming from me. And so now as I move into adulthood, I think it's a very similar thing when I'm going into this like social situation tonight, where anything that I'm thinking about whether he will or will not approve, or the next family member will or will not approve, or what they'll think of it or whatever, that's me. That's not really them. Because at the end of the day, I know, like in that case back then, I did my best. I put so much effort into that thing, and it might not have been to scale, but it was so freaking detailed. And like now I'm doing the thing. I have my own business, right? Like I'm paying my bills, I'm doing my stuff. And so why do I look outside? I don't think I do. I think it's me projecting my insecurities to make sense of them or justify them in some way, which really in the end is going to hold me back.
Absolutely. No, I agree with this 100%. And I think it's it's a major defining factor of my experience too, that it's a way to, like you said, like visualize or make sense of complicated feelings that are, self-doubt and things like that are easier to visualize when you can think that it's someone else who's applying that pressure. And it's funny because when you grow up, like I remember I always just wanted really badly for my family to like take my interactions with them at face value and not apply all that meaning to it. But at the same time, it goes both ways. And, living with that much pressure that you put on yourself all the time, it does make it really hard also to have interactions with your family that are literally taking that are face value because you already have this like predisposed frame for how, what they're going to say and how it's going to come across and all that kind of stuff. And I think that gets really confusing as you get older, because it's important to intentionally approach that and think about it. in your interactions with them, but a lot of the same triggers will still exist for, the same conversation. Like, you know how to have an argument with your parents, and they know how to have an argument with you. And it's so hard, whether it's force of habit or just like trying to relearn communication, it's so hard to navigate without it becoming very tense, I find. And that doesn't matter how loving or how, like how whatever, it doesn't matter how your relationship is with your parents. That's just how your family is when you live so close to people for that long. And I think trying to navigate like your own internal processing and then this like really fraught communicational situation is really confusing. And I think the other thing I think that is important with this that I'm trying to think about too is that it takes time to do, like, you can't jump to being a fully actualized adult just because you realize that it's what you want to do. Yeah, exactly. You're like, oh my God, I got it. I fixed it. I'm never going to have an issue talking to my family again. And I am the ultimate adult, and I'm 25. And that's not how, that's not how that works. So I think part of it that I'm really thinking about now too is the acknowledgement that it does take time and repeated communication and repeated conversations with myself, and then also with my family. And that's good. Like, that's not, if it takes more than one attempt, that's not bad. Like, that's not a failure on anyone's part at all. That's how it goes.
Yeah. Oh my God, yes. Also, I like that visualization of like, oh, little pretty box with a little bow. I'm 25. I'm done. That's it. Like, thank you. Goodbye. And I think, like, as you're talking about kind of where you're at right now with those maybe more tense conversations and kind of a little bit more adversity, I guess, in creating this space to be your full actualized self with that pretty box and the bow and the whatever. Because I'm like, oh yeah, I don't really have that. But then I think back, it was like, no, but I did have that, right? It just kind of came like, because you're away at school now at the age of 25. I moved away at school when I was 18. So some of these things just happened a little bit earlier on for me. And so for me, those times were like, I was just talking to a friend about this yesterday. It was like the year where I had a different family member help me pay for my flight so that there wasn't an expectation that I would spend all my time at home. Because I knew at the time that I wasn't capable of being present for that relationship 24/7. And it's the years that I made a decision to not come home for the holidays, because similarly, I just was not ready. I needed to create my own traditions and be in my own space fully before I was able to bring that back and be with them and have my independent life. And that's how I did it. It doesn't look that way for everyone. Like for you, like you're coming home and doing it like in real time, figure this stuff out. I think for me, I just wasn't quite ready at the time. So I was like, you know what, I need to keep this physical separation. And so those were kind of the moments I had that a little bit. And I think for me, it's been a big part of it too, is like being able to take care of myself that way and not take on the responsibility of the other people's feelings. Not that I would ever intentionally do something to like hurt a family member. But of course, it's not easy for a mom when her child says, I'm not coming home for Christmas this year. And that's the one time of the year you get to see me. And so being able to navigate those interactions with grace and like also knowing when it was time for me to come back and when I was capable of doing that. I mean, like, okay, Natalie, like, check your ego at the door. This isn't about you. Go and be present for your parent who needs you right now. And so now that's how I get to enter the relationship. Not always like, oh, she needs me, but from a much more like genuine place of not feeling like I have to, but feeling like I want to.
Mm-hmm. That should be the goal. That's what I think, that's what I want to like emulate, and what I think I think that you should aspire to is that wanting to have a relationship with your parents because you want to, like, not out of a sense of obligation, because you want to. And that is a huge distinction. And I think that makes all the difference in like how present you are when you're with them. The quality of your interactions, the things that you want to do when you're with them, like all that kind of stuff. And I think that's a really key part of being an adult and having a successful relationship, because as you get older, if it's just like, if you are drawn by this sense of obligation, like, I think it will take a toll on the quality of your interactions with those people. And so I think, yeah, showing up for them because you want to, when you're ready to, is like so important. But you're right that in order to accomplish that, you do have to also make sure that you are taking care of yourself, or else you won't be able to get there, because you need to have the capacity to get there. And that's really, it's really complicated, because the sense of obligation, or I guess the sense of duty, is like very strong with like a lot of people towards their parents. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I think the motivating factors can be examined a little more. And when you think about, like, what makes you feel like, you have to do X, Y, or Z for them, and or like, if it's a question of you wanting to take care of them or be there for them, like, because out of like love and because you want to, or if it's like you actually changing the course of your own life, or limiting your own happiness, or not attaining what you wanted to attain, like on your own level, out of some kind of sense of parental, I don't even know what, like something that you've probably constructed about your relationship with your parents that is then impacting you in a way that it shouldn't be, that's not healthy. And so I think it's like, it's challenging to have to wrestle with all of that. But I think when you can come to it and have like a really peaceful relationship with your family, I just think it's a humongous amount of very deep rooted anxiety that you can lift.
Yeah. And I think, like, for me, thinking about when you say that, like a peaceful relationship with your family, like my mom and I have probably had the most turmoil and the most conflict. And we also currently have this amazing relationship that I'm so grateful for. And like, more often than not, we'll text each other good morning and we'll text each other good night. And I see her not necessarily for a long period of time all the time, but I see her now that I live close, like a bit more frequently. Or she'll like, she'll pick stuff up at Costco and like I'll pay her back, but she'll pick stuff up at Costco and like bring it by. And so she'll get to pop by for like a quick visit and see her grand cat and like little things like that. And those small interactions, like especially day to day with working, like she works a lot too, like working long hours, having, everything else that I'm doing and gym and whatever, and just needing time to recuperate. Like sometimes I don't have capacity for like a big family dinner. And so those little interactions I know are so meaningful for her. And it's also a way, and for me, and it's a way that I can show up for that relationship that feels aligned and can feel peaceful, and I can be present for the duration of it. And it's a nice little pick me up during the week to get to see her face. And I'm also gonna like pull the like best booze card, because I know more about you than everyone else, and just say that I think a big thing that I'm picking up on from what you were just talking about that might be an influencing factor here, where it's augmented for you, is also the cultural component of that feeling of duty, and like what you must do to honor your parents, that kind of thing. If you're open to touching on that a little bit.
Oh yeah, no, it's a huge thing. And I think that's a huge thing. Yeah, it's a huge thing for a lot of people, is that this is like the other part of family relationships that gets really complicated, is cultural memory. Because that is like, that's so big and so hard to touch and really hard. And depending on your relationship with your culture as well, then there's like this whole other level of things that comes up, and it's complicated. It's very complicated. Mm-hmm.
Can I challenge you to talk from your perspective?
Yes.
You're really good at talking in general yous, and I'm curious about the you that is the I.
Okay, I know. So yeah, I mean, yeah, with like me specifically, so I like with my engaging with my culture on my mother's side of the family, it was complicated, further complicated by the fact that I don't carry much of like a physical resemblance. Like I grew up with my mom's side of the family who are Indian, and like really spent most of my time with that side of the family, and grew up with that cultural heritage. But I feel like I had even more sort of a sense of like guilty duty, because like the family duty thing is a huge thing in Indian culture, huge. But B, I felt like I maybe was a little bit extra guilty about it, because I felt like I needed to try harder to be part of that culture, because I don't look like it, and you wouldn't assume that I had anything to say or had a part in that community just by looking at me. And so I felt, I'm not going to say, I was going to phrase this differently, but I felt like that was something that my mom was aware of growing up, and that it was like something that bothered her, because I could choose whether or not, to kind of engage with some things. And so that's what I felt anyway. And it was there's a lot of guilt, and there's a huge sense of duty there, but also like almost like the chip on the shoulder kind of thing as well, where like I have to be the most engaged in the community, or they don't need to keep me because there's nothing like, I'm Canadian, like I don't look like I fit in, I don't speak the language, so where do I go? Like, where do I fit in this thing? And so, yeah, it's complicated, and that does definitely play into the sense of like familial duty, because it's a whole other layer of ingrained things. And that, whereas your own personal sense of parental duty extends, it extends across your lifetime. Like my life, I felt my duty to my parents for my life, but the cultural tradition, I almost swore, the cultural tradition, the cultural tradition of instilling that in your family, like thousands of years. And so it feels really big and hard to negotiate. And so then when you're trying to further, examine your relationship, like when I'm trying to further examine my relationship with my parents, and I, like you said, have a peaceful relationship with them, there's a few layers of complication there that are quite big. And I don't know if it is possible in that context to ever actually like be completely free of that feeling. I don't know. I feel like no, but I feel like it's more it's more for me going to be like learning to live peacefully with all of these layers, because they are, like it's really, I think, as much as I just vented about how complicated and scary it is, I think it's also really beautiful, and I love the notion of cultural memory as well. So, and I think it's important. It just comes with a lot of things that are very complicated.
Yeah. And like, I obviously don't have that same cultural background. Well, maybe not obvious, whatever, but I don't. So I can't speak too much to that. But I know from talking with you, and I do have actually quite a few friends who come from like very traditional Indian backgrounds. Mm-hmm. And so that's something I've talked to them about a lot. And so I would imagine that the other part, I know you and I have touched on this a little bit, is like, now coming in as your own person, like how much of this new independent adult self do I need to bring into that environment? And what am I okay with kind of putting on the back burner while I'm in this space, so that I can still respect and honor those traditions, but in a way that feels aligned for me?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, totally. Absolutely. It's a huge, it's a big question to try and figure out, like so what am I comfortable, like what are the levels that I'm comfortable with? Like what parts of me are gonna do, like what parts of my culture do I want to carry with me into my life, and vice versa, like what parts of my daily life do I want to then like have a direct engagement with like my family and my like the cultural activities, like like there's like there is a bit of a divide, and I think it takes a long time to figure out what you're comfortable with and what feels like honest, because it's a very interesting gray area to try and traverse, I think. And I think anybody who is a child of a cultural background like that's more traditional, or like it's just different than where they are living now, anybody who has that experience can have that, feels like they need to walk that tightrope, I think, about like how much of my culture fits in with the way that I have chosen to live my life and that I want to keep living, and then how much of my experiences should I bring in, like how much can I like pull at both until I feel comfortable, but also like how much do I want to like try and blend these things, because I think there's something to be said for doing that too, but it's only to the point where you are still like healthy and not like tearing yourself apart at the same time. So it's I've said complicated like 5,000 times, but I think it's a really interesting thing to think about. It's like a very like trying to like play with these two realms of experience and see where you fit, and then also like what you want to kind of, because you have a lot of room in that way to like I don't know, like I can kind of like tug at these different ideas, you know, and I think that's really interesting too. But I also only want to do it to the extent that I still feel healthy and not exhausted.
Totally. Yeah, it's complicated. Um, yeah, and I think that's where it kind of comes into play of like, okay, like really just following those like internal pulls and staying aligned with self so that I can know when I'm sacrificing or leaving behind too much, right? And like, how can I show up for that family and family gathering in an honest way without kind of like, you know, without playing the angsty teenager role of, well, this is who I am, so y'all better get with the program like that. Because as an adult, I don't need to do that. Like, there are certain things that I can be okay with setting aside for a conversation, just so I can be there and whatever and have it go smoothly. There's also certain things that I know I cannot leave behind. And like, if certain topics get said or comments get made, I'm saying something. And so knowing where that balance is, and also then being okay with the outcomes in the situations where I'm not okay with leaving that thing behind and what could come of that. And that's where kind of that grief and processing and like doing the work to let go of expectation, I think, comes into play. So like a big thing for me tonight is going to be going into that environment and just really looking for every opportunity I can to live in the confidence and conviction of the life I'm living right now. And so that'll kind of be my focus. And so that's been something very constructive. I think on the flip side of that, like the most difficult part of this process is really to be able to let go of the need for approval, like especially from my father in my case, and to be okay with the fact that like he probably isn't going to be fully on board with what I'm doing. He might not understand it, and to be able to be okay with that. Because I definitely still go into interactions sometimes feelings like I have something to prove. And then when I don't prove it, I get upset. But it's like, but I know this. And so that's kind of my like most difficult thing. And then also what I find most helpful is to really kind of honor that. So like doing something beforehand to really just sit in that and ground and make sure I do spend time talking to people who I know will lift me up, right? And also, a side note, having an out. Because going to these family gatherings, like I always like to go when I can, but maybe I am not okay with staying the full like 5 or 6 hours that everyone's going to be there. Like tonight's is starting at 5:30. There will be dinner and stuff. So typically I'll give myself until dessert comes out, and I normally can't eat it. So that's when I'll leave. And I just know that ahead of time. Yeah. And so now we are, I think, about to wrap up just because I'm looking at the time frame and we're like, we're talking. So I'd like to hear really quick from you though, before we do our card draw, because I think it's going to be super awesome. Like, what have you found, like one, the most difficult thing to navigate, and then also one of the most helpful tools you've implemented so far in navigating these relationships as the adult that you are as of now?
Okay, I will think, yeah, quickly for me, for sure. Most difficult thing for me, 100%, the guilt complex. And because it leads me, like we were talking about self-inflicted things, it leads me to communicate in ways with my parents that I don't even think is constructive, that I don't want to communicate, but I'm lashing out because I've already set myself up to this point that I'm so upset before we even talk, because I have all this like ingrained, a blend of cultural and parental guilt that I have made for myself. It's like a really nice custom blend of stuff that I then will like bathe in before I see them, and then it gets really upsetting for everyone. So the guilt is a big thing. What has helped the most, I think, for me is, like you said, taking time with myself. And it's, it's okay to have to disengage for a little bit. And I, lean on my friends and my community when I need to, and sharing things like that. And then also just having the time to, whether it's journaling or whatever else you need to do to take care of yourself, to like make sure that you are really acknowledging where you're at with things, especially things that are more complicated that have to do with your family relationships, like knowing where you're at. So you are at peace internally before you start tackling this with other people. And then also like something that helps with my family things is also just not, I still try really hard to do things that I enjoy doing with my family, I love to spend time with them. So even if we're wrestling with huge things, I think being able to do something enjoyable just light, just something, just because I mean, I still love them. We all love each other. We are trying to figure out this stuff together, and it's really hard. So let's go laser bowling sometimes, and like, and that it makes it feel like, you know, it'll end up all right. Like we're all gonna work it out, and it's gonna be the most peaceful way it can. And in the meantime, to not forget that you can also enjoy spending time with each other, even though there are definitely things that are hard to navigate.
Love it. So yeah. I think we're going to do, correct me if I'm wrong, a single card draw to set for myself kind of an intention for the evening going into this family gathering. And then I know you mentioned, I think your parents are coming in a couple of weeks. So is it possible to set an intention this far out for that? I don't know. Is that a thing you can do?
I think so, because I can put it up on my little table and look at it. So it'll be useful. Okay, so I'll do yours first. I'm going to shuffle them. Oh my goodness. Okay, got the cards. I'm going to shuffle them. And you can just reflect on your intentions in the meantime. And we'll do a draw in a sec. Oh, one is falling out of the deck, so I'm going to pull that one. Yeah. Okay. Page of Swords.
Interesting. I have a theme for swords. This happened last time.
Yeah, because I mean, it makes sense to me because the swords are really like communication, logic, intellect, but also like interpersonal communication and potential like tensions with communication. Swords. So the Page of Swords is somebody who is seeking a new avenue in this way, is like starting out on a path where they're trying to try something new in this realm, and they don't have all the information. But the most important thing is that they're willing to go forward. Like they're not the expert. They're at the beginning of this journey. So they're not coming from a position of authority, but they want to take a step into a new direction and uncover something new in this realm. So I think in terms of your intention setting for tonight, it's just not worrying about necessarily being able to predict exactly how everything's going to go or what's going to happen, but just being willing to be present and be there, which it sounds like you already are. So
that is so fitting, because this is like, you know, I've been doing my business thing for a little while now because you were there like right at the beginning, but this is really the first time that I'm going into a family setting with everyone there where I'm like, this is what I do. In the past, it was kind of, at least with regards to how I delivered it to them, it was much more of this is what I want to be doing. And so it's definitely like new in terms of navigating that conversation and that presentation in that context. So yeah, very fitting, very apropos.
Apropos.
Yeah. Is that even the word? I don't know, but
I don't know, it sounds classy though. Yeah.
Indubitably. I love it. Okay, your turn.
I will do it. Yeah. Okay, let me shuffle me. Shuffle, shuffle, shuffle. Let's see what happens. Maybe another one will fall out. Ooh. Okay, I had another one kind of like come out of the deck a little bit. Okay. Aw, dang. I also got swords.
All right.
I got the Six of Swords, which is exactly what we were talking about in this conversation, the sense of like mourning an older way of things. This is about leaving behind and going towards other things. And it is hard to leave things behind. And sometimes it feels like you are running away, but you're like, it's not running away. It's accepting help to get away from something, to move away from something towards something better. And it's not necessarily pleasant, but like, it's not necessarily happy, but it's good. It's like better for you to do it that way. So that makes sense.
That sounds very fitting to everything you and I have been talking about your current situation.
Yeah. I never did swords, so this is very interesting for me.
It's my fault. I think it's kind of cool too, because like this episode won't be airing for like a little while, so it'll be interesting to see what that has led you to by the time that I get around to editing this.
No, I'm really interested for the time, like the airtime of this conversation. I'm really interested to check in at that point and see what's come around. I think it's going to be a very interesting, in a good way, like a very interesting summer for sure.
Yeah, we might have to do Adulting 2.0.
Yes, for ultra adults.
Oh, I don't think adults make those jokes.
Oh, damn it.
We're screwed. But yeah, I love it. I love you. My
I
best
love you.
boo.
Here's my best boo. This was great.
Amazing. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into today's episode of Coffee Time. As always, I invite you to reflect on it all, take what you like, and leave what you don't. If today's episode resonated, comment below or screenshot and share to your social media. And don't forget to tag me at I am Natalie Christina on Insta. And I would super appreciate if you hit the subscribe button to help make this show accessible to more magical humans like yourself. Until next time, I am your muchly caffeinated host, Natalie of Natalie Christina Coaching.